By the end of 1940, Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine. Hitler dominated Europe. But across the Atlantic, America was wrestling with a question that would define the war: to fight or to fund? Isolationism was deeply rooted in American politics. Selling arms for cash, the cash and carry system, was depleting Britain's gold reserves. Prime Minister Winston Churchill made it clear Britain was broke and desperate. Roosevelt understood the stakes. If Britain fell, America would face Hitler alone. He needed a way to arm his allies without violating neutrality laws or bankrupting them. We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself. Roosevelt framed his plan not as an act of war, but of common sense. His famous garden hose analogy: you lend your hose to a neighbor whose house is on fire. You don't ask for payment until the fire is out. The debate over Bill H.R. 1776, the Lend-Lease Act, tore through Congress for months. Critics called it an act of war, a blank check to Europe. But the necessity was clear. On March 11, 1941, Roosevelt signed the act. It empowered the president to sell, transfer title to, exchange, lease, lend, or otherwise dispose of war materials to any country deemed vital to U.S. defense. The floodgates opened. Lend-Lease was not just aid, it was a commitment of unprecedented industrial power. America's factories, once producing cars, were now the beating heart of the Allied war effort. By the end of the war, the U.S. had transferred materials worth over $50 billion, an astonishing sum that dwarfed all other assistance. What did this aid consist of? 11,400 aircraft, 44,000 jeeps, 12,000 armored vehicles, 4.4 million tons of food, and enough railway equipment to rebuild vast stretches of Soviet infrastructure. Getting the supplies to the fighting front required a logistical miracle, braving German U-boats, frozen seas, and mountainous terrain. The Arctic run to Murmansk was arguably the most perilous. Merchant ships navigated a gauntlet of German naval and air attacks, delivering critically needed aid to the Soviet Union. Many ships never arrived. To supply the Eastern Front, the Persian Corridor became the main lifeline. American vehicles, shipped to Iran, were driven thousands of miles north by local drivers, often the first major exposure to American technology for the region. The Soviets affectionately nicknamed the American trucks Studebakers or Lend-Lease. They were rugged, reliable, and crucial for mobility on the Eastern Front. Of all recipients, the Soviet Union received the largest share after the British Commonwealth. While Soviet factories produced tanks, American aid provided the infrastructure to wage modern war. Lend-Lease supplied the tracks and locomotives that moved Soviet armies across the vast Eastern Front. Without them, the critical counteroffensives would have ground to a halt. American planes, particularly the P-39 Airacopter, became mainstays for Soviet air superiority. They were valued for their ruggedness and heavy cannon. Perhaps the most underestimated component was food. 4.4 million tons of canned meat, flour, and sugar sustained the Soviet civilian population and, critically, kept the Red Army fed in fighting. The aid was comprehensive: high-octane aviation fuel, radios for communication, boots for soldiers, and raw materials like aluminum and copper. It wasn't just supplementing Soviet output, it was enabling it. Marshal Georgy Zhukov later admitted that the aid was decisive. It gave the Red Army the mobility and logistics necessary to pursue and defeat the Wehrmacht across Eastern Europe. While the Soviet people paid the highest price in blood, Lend-Lease provided the industrial and logistical cushion that allowed them to survive the initial Nazi onslaught and ultimately push to Berlin. By May 1945, the war in Europe was over. Lend-Lease was largely terminated, its mission complete. The arsenal of democracy had delivered. The question of repayment immediately became complex. The original agreement stated that materials not destroyed in the war were to be returned or paid for. But the geopolitical landscape had fundamentally shifted. The rapid cessation of Lend-Lease by President Truman, right after VJ Day, was viewed by the Soviets as a political move, poisoning the post-war relationship and contributing to the Cold War divide. The U.S. eventually negotiated debt settlements with most allies. The Soviet Union's final payment for their portion of non-military aid was not made until 2006. The true value of Lend-Lease was not measured in dollars, but in time. It bought the Allies the time needed to industrialize, mobilize, and survive. Lend-Lease successfully implemented a non-interventionist foreign policy by interventionist means. It armed the Allies, kept America out of the fight until necessary, and ensured that American resources, not American lives, bore the initial cost of saving the world. The American economy proved that the free world could outproduce totalitarianism. The arsenal of democracy delivered victory, changing the balance of global power forever.